We help a lot of people move to the Twin Cities. And specifically, a lot of people are targeting, ending up in, putting roots in St. Paul proper. I actually just closed on a home like a week ago in St. Paul proper. So when I say that I love St. Paul, just know that I mean it. In this video, we're going to be looking at a map, kind of taking a virtual sort of internet tour of St. Paul, looking at the neighborhoods and talking through how one neighborhood might sort of feel or what's going on there versus how other neighborhoods are feeling. So let's get into it. I released a video on this channel that is basically a companion video to this, and it's only about Minneapolis proper, right? And actually at the beginning of that video, I said, I live in Minneapolis, which is true. I do still live in Minneapolis, but I just bought a house, just closed on a house in St. Paul. I think both places are awesome, and a lot of the people that we help end up looking at both, right? They end up considering certain places in Minneapolis, certain places in St. Paul, whatever is, suits what they're looking for, but there are unique differences across Minneapolis and St. Paul. And so in this video, we're looking at St. Paul. I'm going to be using publicly available resources, and I'll do my best to link them in the description below. Primarily, we will be using Google Maps because I think that's just the most universally helpful tool, because everybody out there can go onto Google and look at these maps, and it's not going to like appear a very different way than what you're used to. Of course, you might be using, Zillow or Realtor.com or some of these publicly available home searching sites. And that's fine. If you're interested in following along and making notes or anything like that, open up Google Maps, because that's what we're going to be using a lot for this video. And before I go any further, just like the video we did on Minneapolis, I'm not going to be diving into crime or safety. As realtors, we have to be very careful about not steering or not sort of using coded language to steer based on protected classes. There are legally protected classes that we cannot, guide somebody to live in a certain place or not live in a certain place based on protected classes. And so we don't, and we won't in this video either. The truth is, we're really good at helping people end up where they want to be, regardless of those protected classes. And it is my opinion that when somebody is trying to, get us to answer something based on a protected class, it's out of ignorance. It's that they usually don't realize that that's not actually going to be a helpful thing to actually get them to the place that they want to live and put in roots and all that. And so I'm sure you can go on Reddit and you can find a bunch of commentary about things that we as licensed real estate agents cannot talk about, but that's not going to be on this video. I say this all the time, but the idea of feeling safe is a very relative concept to one's experience, to who you are and all that. My experience of safety is very different than my fiance's experience of safety. And when we're together, we experience that even differently than when we're individuals out in the world. But of course, there are crime statistics that a person can really dive into. And I just want to show you how you can try to find that in St. Paul. So go to Google and search St. Paul Police Department crime map. For me, it's literally the top link, crime statistics St. Paul. But what you will find is that the way the information is laid out, it's kind of up to you to like make maps and find these things, at least the publicly available stuff. So there is a link down here, how-to instructions on using the open information portal. I think this would be a good place to start. It shows you how you can click into different pieces, different elements of all of this open information, and then you can, from there, you can make maps, or you can just look at bar graphs and things like that. It just depends on how granular you want to get and like what you want to filter and search by. It's probably pretty robust, but it's also quite complicated to get that granular kind of information, where I did find in doing a Minneapolis video like this and in helping a lot of people navigate that, Minneapolis's crime map is just like easier to arrive at. Does that actually mean it's more helpful? I don't know. I guess that's up to one's own opinion. So we're actually gonna dive into the map here. And I'm sure you've been looking at this map quite a bit as you are thinking about moving to the Twin Cities. Obviously, Minneapolis over here, and if you click on the St. Paul, Google has a nice way of sort of creating the outline of the actual city for you, and then it will go even more in depth, and it will let you, create a boundary of the neighborhoods. I do find that the neighborhood/community relationship is actually simpler in St. Paul than Minneapolis. Minneapolis has something like 9 greater communities, and within those, there's something like 40 or something neighborhoods. It seems, and at least colloquially in how residents seem to talk about it, it seems that in St. Paul, there's just kind of communities, right? Or just neighborhoods. There's not too much of a difference between the two. And so I might use community and neighborhood interchangeably in this video, and that's because they kind of are, or at least that's how people who live here seem to talk about it. So diving into St. Paul real quick, St. Paul has kind of a reputation for having strangely organized roads, street names, avenues, and things like that. And some of it is based on the fact that it's a river town, right? Back in the day, it was a small river town, and now obviously it's grown to be quite a bit more than that. But you'll have kind of a stranger shape. And just throwing this out here to start, you'll see that here is the boundary. Outside of that boundary is somewhere called West St. Paul. That is not St. Paul. That's a different municipality called West St. Paul. You'll see that there's a place called North St. Paul. That is also not St. Paul. That's a different municipality outside of St. Paul. There's also a South St. Paul. And for some reason, there's not an East St. Paul, but there is a greater east side of St. Paul, which happens to be technically within the boundary of St. Paul. A little bit odd, for sure. I'm not sure, who was involved in those decisions, but nonetheless, they are what they are. And real quick, before I go any further, my name is Jesse Lynch. I run the hardest working real estate team in the game. We're called To the Twin Cities. You can check out our website, tothetwincities.com. But this YouTube channel that you're on right now is all about helping you find a place to call home here in the Twin Cities. And relocations is what we do, and it's what we do better than anybody else. It's what we spend all of our time thinking about and solving problems for, creating systems for, etc. So if that appeals to you, then subscribe to this channel, click the little bell to get notified so you can see when these videos come out, and go down the rabbit hole. Watch the stuff that we put out over the years. We've been doing this for coming up on 5 years, and there's a lot of information on this channel, and you can get as into it as you want to. And if you're interested in working with us, we would love to help you find a home here. And you can go to our website, tothetwincities.com. We have a contact form there that you can fill out in like 30 seconds or less. And then we'll just get the show on the road and get things moving for you from there. And now back to the video, and we're diving into this map. But real quick, this is the Google map. I want to show you a neighborhood map that I found actually on Wikipedia. I think it was the best map that I could find, and it just so happened to be in Wikipedia. And I think just like a Wikipedia user named like Eoin or something like that is the person who made it, and it's actually super helpful. There's a lot of versions of this, but they're very like artistic, and I don't want to, jock anybody's artistic style here. So these are what at least colloquially are understood to be the different neighborhoods of St. Paul. I believe it's pretty accurate from, a data standpoint as well. But this is, when I think of the different neighborhoods in St. Paul, these are all of those neighborhoods. So we're going to click back into Google, and we're going to kind of dive into those. So starting from the northwest, you have St. Anthony Park. Just across I-94 and to the south of that is a pretty small neighborhood called Merriam Park. You can see it also reaches up a little bit over I-94. To the south of that, you have Macalester-Groveland, aka Mac Groveland. To the south of that, you have the southernmost point in St. Paul, I think maybe aside from Battle Creek, called Highland Park. Then to the northeast of that, you have the West 7th neighborhood, which takes up this sort of narrower sliver of St. Paul. To the north of that, you have Summit Hill. Again, pretty small little neighborhood here. And then to the north of that, you have Summit University. So real quick, before I keep going, we often will refer to everything south of 94, and then I guess really it's both to the west of the Mississippi River and to the east of the Mississippi River. We'll call this all the Southern Triangle of St. Paul. That's something the team says, so we know what we're talking about, but like nobody else calls it that to my knowledge. So you can say that to us, we'll understand. If you say it to other people, they might say, what are you talking about, right? So anyway, back Summit University, and then we kind of got to go a little bit diagonal. To the northwest of there, you have the Hamline-Midway neighborhood, okay? And then to the north of that, you have the Como Park neighborhood. You can see how just over here is where the St. Anthony Park is, and there's kind of a gap in here, right, between there and the Como Park neighborhood. That's actually all the Minnesota State Fairgrounds, which is technically not in St. Paul proper. It's actually in Falcon Heights, per the map, per geography. So back to the north of Hamline-Midway, you have the Como Park neighborhood. To the east of Como Park, you have what's called North End. Okay, and then to the south of that, you have the Thomas Dale neighborhood, kind of a long east to west strip there. Then you have what is basically greater downtown St. Paul, which includes a few neighborhoods and kind of a lot going on down there. And then to the northeast of here, which is largely divided by 35E here and I-94, you have the Payne-Phalen neighborhood. And then to the southeast of that, you have Dayton's Bluff. Okay, kind of a smaller neighborhood on this east side of St. Paul. Then I mentioned earlier, Greater East Side. So that's the easternmost neighborhood or area of St. Paul. And then to the south of Greater East Side, to the east of Dayton's Bluff, and the furthest southeast neighborhood this is one of those neighborhoods that won't really pull up properly in Google Maps. I don't know why. You'll see there's Battle Creek, okay? That's kind of a smaller neighborhood here. But then really the greater, let's call it community because it's kind of a collection of neighborhoods, is known as Sunray, Battle Creek, Highwood. And that is basically going to take up the space to the east of Dayton's Bluff, west of McKnight Road, and then like all the way down here over by Pig's Eye Lake and things like that. So a pretty large area, and for some reason, it doesn't pull up on Google. And then lastly, you have West Side St. Paul, which is really the only area that is to the south-ish of the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River curves quite interestingly right here. But yeah, it's a very small patch of St. Paul proper, and this is called West Side St. Paul. So now I'm going to dive into sort of the micro neighborhoods and give you an idea of kind of what is going on in all these different places. I'm going to start from the northwest and more or less work through how I just did, although I know that I did it in kind of a strange route. So the northwesternmost neighborhood is called St. Anthony Park. St. Anthony Park is a gem. It's also maybe a little bit slept on, a little bit overlooked by a lot of people. And I will say, when you look at it on the map, it seems like it must be pretty industrial, right? There's a lot of train tracks going through there. And then, yeah, there's also, it's right along I-94. Highway 280 kind of goes through it as well. So there is a lot of industry and a lot of, areas of it that maybe aren't too residential even. But there's two sort of separate sides of St. Anthony Park. There's South St. Anthony Park, which is pretty dense and also contains a lot of that industrial aspect. University Avenue right here. There's a light rail that goes along University Avenue. So there's some connectivity there. You also have really, really good access to the University of Minnesota, the main campus. And then just to the east of the St. Anthony Park, the northern part of it, is the St. Paul campus of the University of Minnesota, a much, much smaller, probably quieter campus than the main campus. So you have kind of this lower part, which is more dense, more like apartments and taller buildings, as well as a lot of commercial and industrial aspects. And then you have this northern part of St. Anthony Park, which I would say is basically north of Energy Park Drive or the railroad track right there. And then south of Hoyt, west of Cleveland, and I would even say east of 280 is this completely adorable sort of villagey area. And it has a lot of things that people love about it. Specifically, there's kind of this main little downtown core here that a lot of people seem to kind of fall in love with and get quite smitten with. And this leads a lot to the villagey feel of things. So if we kind of go down this street right here, we're coming up on this main intersection, which is basically Como and Carter, where you have quite a few great little restaurants. I always say that this strip almost looks European as you're just looking at this area. But yeah, it's in St. Paul and it's really, really lovely. There's some great restaurants, some like really, really exceptional restaurants right here for how small it is and how little of an area it is. And then there's also what I think is probably the most beautiful library in St. Paul proper. I'm told, or I've read, that it has the largest selection of children's books in all of the Twin Cities libraries. And it's just such a beautiful building and just a beautiful intersection right here. And you can go about a block in any direction from here, and you're in a pretty peaceful little neighborhood vibe, right? And so that is St. Anthony Park. And may I recommend, if you're relocating here, I probably wouldn't restrict your search only to St. Anthony Park because it will be difficult to find a place. If you have your heart set on it, it is what it is, but maybe expect to rent for a little while if that's, where you're planning on going. And lastly, because there are so few listings that actually show up in St. Anthony Park, I think you're going to need a level of creativity when you purchase a house. You're going to have to be willing to see through what the house is at the moment and be able to turn it into something. Or you will pay quite a premium for a completely move-in ready house in a neighborhood that people are really, really competing to live in. Then to the south of St. Anthony Park is Merriam Park. Like I mentioned, most of it is to the south of I-94, although there is a little bit of it up here to the north of I-94. And it also has some Mississippi River frontage, and it is directly contiguous to Minneapolis proper, contiguous to a few different neighborhoods in Minneapolis. One is the greater Longfellow area over here. There's the Lake Street Bridge right here, or the Marshall Avenue Bridge, or the Lake Street Marshall Avenue Bridge that connects the two. And then just across I-94, kind of at this northwestern tip, is what's known as Prospect Park in Minneapolis right here. And again, really great access to the University of Minnesota, but it also contains a highly regarded college or university, the University of St. Thomas, and it's really close to Macalester College and St. Catherine's College as well, which are really, really highly regarded, and actually Hamline University right up here. So a lot of university action, a lot of university activity happening, but Merriam Park on the whole has some really, really beautiful aspects to it. So you'll see that the northern boundary is University Avenue, and again, the light rail runs along University Avenue. So there's a really, really convenient factor there. I think there's two stops, one right around here just to the west of Fairview, and then a big one at Snelling Avenue and University. And where University Avenue meets Snelling Avenue is one of the busiest intersections in St. Paul proper, that's not in downtown. So you have Snelling on the east, University on the north, Summit Avenue on the south, and basically the river on the west. You can see right in here is a really residential area where Marshall Avenue has some commercial spaces, but then all in here, it's a lot of houses and some really, really beautiful houses as well. There's also one of my favorite antique stores, shout out on, on Selby Avenue in Fairview. This Mall of St. Paul is an awesome antique store, and there's some right across the way from there and some down the street. I know you're not watching this for antiques, but they're cool. Then over to the eastern edge, you have a pretty huge intersection here, which is Selby and Snelling, which is home to a Whole Foods, a Yum, and all kind of for the block or so down this street is some cool commercial stuff, right? And some cool little neighborhood stuff, including Neighborhood Cafe, as well as like Patina right here. And yeah, you can just kind of see it's kind of a main commercial core going on right here, and then that goes in a little bit further here as well. And then yeah, within a block you're into a pretty residential area on Selby, but Selby is certainly one of the few main through streets from east to west in St. Paul. So then Summit Avenue, the southern edge of this, it's worth mentioning Summit Avenue is home to some of the most beautiful houses in all of Minnesota, I think is fair to say. Truly beautiful, massive houses, but like really, really great, and some of my favorite architecture in the city, if not the country. It's just a place that I've really become quite accustomed to being able to drive by, and there's just some truly, truly beautiful homes along this area. And the further you go down, kind of the older it gets typically, but you also have even like the governor's mansion and stuff along Summit. But Summit runs basically the whole way east to west in what we call the Southern Triangle down here, and then it ends more or less in downtown. It takes a turn and heads toward downtown. It ends somewhere there. I don't know if I've ever actually taken note of where it officially ends, but somewhere right by the cathedral. Then on this western side of Merriam Park, you have the University of St. Thomas, again, a highly regarded university, and you have Mississippi River Boulevard and the Mississippi River as that western border. Then heading south, you have Macalester-Groveland, aka Mac Groveland. This is one of the most beloved, and I would say hyped, well-known neighborhoods. We've talked about it quite a bit on this channel. We've done virtual tours on it, and there's just a really, really beautiful sort of like aesthetic quality to the houses here. And you also have Macalester College in there, which is a really pretty college, just a beautiful area. Some really charming and a pretty good variety of housing stock, right? Where you have more attainable, like catalog style bungalows from the 1920s or so, all the way up to, proper dream homes within the Macalester-Groveland area. There's also obviously apartments and some duplexes and things like that as well. The northern border is Summit Avenue. Again, the Summit Avenue, beautiful place. Just one street to the south of that I think is really worth mentioning, which is Grand Avenue. And Grand Avenue runs, again, all the way basically east to west in the Southern Triangle, and it's parallel to Summit pretty much the whole time. And while Summit Avenue is sort of a marquee street for homes, Grand Avenue would be the commercial equivalent. Some of the most beautiful and beloved commercial spaces in St. Paul proper. If you're looking for a great restaurant or a great commercial space or something like that, there's a very good chance that you'll find that along Grand Avenue. And so you have the eastern edge is Aid Mill Road. Aid Mill is an interesting road. I believe, don't quote me on this, I think this could just be something I made up in my head, but I believe it used to be a railroad track where it's somewhat submerged under the rest of the city, if that makes any sense, where it's slightly lower than the rest of the streets, and it's actually a very convenient street to get across St. Paul in a way that otherwise you would just be taking kind of the main gridded streets through. Right in this northwest corner, shout outs to Kowalski. Kowalski's is a great local grocery store. There's a lot of them in Minneapolis and St. Paul. I think they do a great job. We have a podcast actually where we talk about like grocery stores and stuff like that. So feel free to watch that on our Welcome to the Twin Cities podcast channel. But then in this southeastern corner, you just about hit where the Trader Joe's is. And again, you have Randolph Avenue as that southern border that runs all the way to the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River and the boulevard all the way along there is going to be really, really beautiful bike path and walking path and stuff like that. It's a great road to drive on as well. I very often will opt to take the River Boulevard instead of the main street, even if it adds 5 minutes to my drive, because it's just a more peaceful and beautiful drive. Don't tell everybody. So if you're not constantly in a hurry, that might be a thing that you're into. Then just to the south of Macalester-Groveland, you have Highland Park, which is a pretty good sized neighborhood. And I would say probably the most suburban feeling neighborhood in all of St. Paul. I'm trying to think if there's anything that beats it. It has a bit more of a corporate presence in a place like this, which is Ford Parkway and Cleveland Avenue. It's an awesome little neighborhood, an awesome little corner, but it is a bit more commercial, right? You have a Target with a Starbucks attached to it. You have like a Noodles and Company and a Chipotle and a Crisp and Green, a Panera Bread. These are all national brands, right? You have Bank of America, Xfinity, Verizon. So like, while it's probably pretty convenient to have all of these things here, they're not exactly the most exciting brands, to have. On the other side, the northern side of Ford Parkway, I think it's a little more charming. I'm not sure why it developed this way, but it did. You have places like Tiffany's, Patina, Quixotic Cafe, which I always used to think was Quixotic, like Don Quixote. I don't know why I thought that. And then you have the Highland Theater, which is a really cool, like 2-screen movie theater. I don't know, what an adorable, front to a theater. Tattoo shop. You have Centro, which is a Mexican place. One very interesting part about Highland Park is that it's one of the only, if not the only place within Minneapolis or St. Paul proper where there's a new development going in. I don't think there's anything quite like this other than like condos or something in downtown. But there was a Ford plant along Ford Parkway, hence the name, where they built like the Ford Ranger for like a decades or something like that. And it was a huge piece of land. You can see this basically from Ford Parkway all the way probably over to Cleveland, I think, or somewhere in around here. It was all owned by Ford. There are now apartments over here, which I believe were also developed by Ford to house their workers back in the day. Now the Ford plant no longer exists here, but a new development is going in. It's called a Highland Bridge, more or less. I don't know, I just call it the old Ford plant personally. There's a lot going on here. A lot of unbelievable new build single family homes are basically have reserved the spot along the Mississippi River Boulevard, right? So everything else, to my knowledge, will be townhomes, so slightly denser, or like condos and apartments. The townhomes, for example, probably start around 700,000, go up to $1 million or so. So it's not like they're like super discounted, right? But there are some really, really great, beautiful townhomes. I've shown quite a few of them. And then, all of the single family homes are custom. Built by some really, really great custom builders. So we'll kind of zoom back out. You have Hidden Falls down here, which is awesome, which is kind of the St. Paul, little brother to Minnehaha Falls. It's quite small by comparison, but it's a really beautiful park space and natural area down here. And you can see all this green. Generally, that's park space. It's really, really pretty. I think the development here over by the old Ford plant or in the old Ford plant has some really, really great stuff. I think it's being designed quite thoughtfully to be, blended into a city that's been around for so long. And really the western and southern border of Highland Park are all the Mississippi River. It curves around here, and we actually had a client who lives who we helped move to Highland Park, who kind of made the joke of like, we actually live to the east and west of the Mississippi River, something I had never considered, whereas everybody always says like, this side of the Mississippi, right? Oh yeah, there's nothing like that this side of the Mississippi. Well, it's interestingly on both sides of the Mississippi, or maybe neither side of the Mississippi. I don't know. Probably on both sides. You will see at sort of the southwestern tip of Highland Park is the airport. And it's really, really close to it. And I talked about airport noise on the other video, the Minneapolis video. But an interesting thing about St. Paul is that there really only one of the runways runs toward St. Paul. And you will find that there's considerably less airport noise right here than there is right here, same distance away from the airport. And that a lot of that just has to do with where the airport, where that traffic is actually heading. Then we're going to head to the northeast toward the West 7th neighborhood. Again, kind of that small, narrow sliver of St. Paul. It's named after the road, West 7th and Fort Road, that runs through it. And an interesting thing is your lifestyle and your access to things doesn't change too much, right? If you just cross under 35E here, more on 35E in just a second. But the pricing does. Houses tend to get quite a bit more affordable by, 10 to 20% or something more affordable just under 35E. Right here. And I will say, if the house is directly along West 7th or Fort Road, that's a busy road. It's a 4-lane road, that runs basically all the way from downtown and all the way out of St. Paul. So it's a heavily trafficked road. It's used a lot. This spot right up here is pretty residential, kind of right in there. The closer you head toward downtown, kind of the busier, the denser it gets. And you do have some really cool, like classic St. Paul staples in this West 7th neighborhood. The one that comes up right here is Casetta's. Casetta is like an Italian joint, right? That's been around for like a very, very long time. Some pretty cool architecture there as well. But yeah, Casetta, I've heard somebody call this Little Italy, and I said, who calls it that? Because I've never heard that other than somebody being like, oh, that's Little Italy. But nonetheless, Casetta is a cool spot. I love architecture like this, so another kind of cool spot right here. And you can see just at the end of this view is the XL Center, which is where the Minnesota Wild play. It's also where concerts and things like that will happen sometimes. And so it gets busy right here after a Wild game. And then as you head down this way, you're heading sort of southwest from downtown. Still some really great architecture and some really great restaurants and things like that all along here. But it's busy. And this road in particular is very busy. And so, typically the more residential, kind of quieter areas are on this section of West 7th. But there are some pretty crazy kind of, lesser known places like Irvine Park here, where there's some really, really stunning old historical homes over in here. Then there are some kind of like pretty interesting spots up here by like Irvine Park, right, where there's some pretty incredible old houses, like some of the older houses in St. Paul. And there's also a restaurant called Four Paws Restaurant right here, not PAWS like a dog, but it's actually this old mansion, which is pretty insane, beautiful old mansion. And it's like the first sort of mansion just outside of downtown. And then, off Exchange, you actually do have some, probably a lot more multifamily and things like that. But it does get a bit more, a bit residential kind of randomly throughout some of these places. You also see the Science Museum of Minnesota, and there's a lot of other things going on down here. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about downtown. And so I said I would talk a little bit more about 35E. So the southern border is the Mississippi River again. The western border is 35E. The northwestern border is 35E. And then, I will say the northeastern border gets pretty wacky over there. Let's call it downtown. But right here, in particular, on 35E, the speed limit is only 45 miles an hour. It's kind of infuriating to drive on, to be honest, because you feel like you're going just so slow for what the highway is. But it does make it a bit quieter for the residents who live right along there, right? And mostly, the highway kind of sits at a different elevation from the neighborhoods, but it does sit closer to West 7th, and then this part of Highland Park and Macalester-Groveland, as well as Summit Hill, sit a bit higher up. Summit Hill especially, which is the next neighborhood we're talking about. Just to the north here of West 7th is what I think is one of the most beautiful neighborhoods in all of the Twin Cities. It's called Summit Hill. We've done videos on this and just about every other neighborhood here. And so for one, Summit Hill is home to Summit Avenue, right? At least the southern part of Summit Avenue. So all of the beautiful houses along Summit Avenue there are in Summit Hill. And it's also home to a really very lovely strip of Grand Avenue. So here's Lexington Parkway and Grand Avenue, home to the Lexington, home to some just really, really great restaurants and shops and things like that. Known as the Shops on Grand is all along here. And in 2020, like a lot of the country saw, there was a little bit of a corporate exodus, right? Because commercial spaces and stores were not exactly doing great during COVID. So quite a few of them left. There were some bigger names of companies that existed here. A lot of them left. Some of them still do exist, but I am noticing that quite a few of these shops are getting filled again. And I think it's a good thing that they're getting filled by, more often than not, more local companies who maybe are I don't know, a little bit more tied to the area. So anyway, some beautiful, and pretty dense commercial spaces all up and down Grand. And there's, just some awesome spots and a cool variety of places. So the northern border is Summit Avenue. The western border is Aid Mill Road. The south and eastern border is all 35W. And then once you get back into here, there's just some truly beautiful homes, let's say along Fairmount, and some pretty stately houses and neighborhoods where, it's a lot more 3-story homes than, let's say, 1.5-story bungalows. Some really large, beautiful, painted ladies, if you will, like those. A lot more of that sort of Victorian presence is in this Summit Hill neighborhood, and probably more of that in Summit Hill than anywhere else in probably all of Minnesota. So some really, really beautiful stuff there, as well as that great walkability if you're, a couple blocks off of Grand, and then just sort of a scenic element along Summit. I often think that Summit Avenue feels like a park, right? It feels like one long park road, and a lot of people do walk and run along Summit Avenue on certain parts of it, just because it is so pretty. So then to the north of Summit Hill, you have the Summit University neighborhood. Another one of, I think, only 2 neighborhoods, or maybe 3 neighborhoods in St. Paul that has I-94 running through it. So it's sort of divided by that. And Summit University is home to what I think is another one of the most scenic neighborhoods, which is called Cathedral Hill. Let me click into that real quick. Some of the coolest old houses in all of St. Paul are in this Cathedral Hill neighborhood. It's got this really exceptionally beautiful architectural element to it, as well as it's home to the Cathedral of St. Paul, which is a really, really pretty cathedral that sort of sits above so much of the city. And you can see the state capitol as well from kind of where the cathedral sits. And Cathedral Hill, we have a whole virtual tour on this very small area because it's just so scenic and exceptional. If somebody was looking for an historical mansion, it's one of maybe 4 places in the Twin Cities that a person might look to find something like that, where proper architect design mansion. But clicking back out to Summit University, that southern border is Summit Avenue. The western border is Lexington Parkway. The northern border is University, and the eastern border is Marion Street over there. And again, it gets a little bit wonky. I'll say the eastern border, more or less, is downtown. So just something to keep in mind. The difference between Summit Avenue and University Avenue is a very, very different experience. University has the light rail. It's a very busy, denser commercial area where there's a lot of activity going on, and it's just busier. Summit Avenue is much slower moving. And a lot of where there's commercial activity happening in the southern portion of Summit University is along Selby Avenue, more in that Cathedral Hill area. Honestly, there's some really great spots here as well. Shout out to Nina's Coffee Shop. W.A. Frost & Co. is also a super cool building, like just a beautiful place, great architecture. Here's Nina's. I love this place. I think it's just such a pretty spot. There's Handsome Hog. There's other things there anyway. And again, some really, really pretty architecture here. And along Selby in general, there's quite a few highly regarded restaurants as well. The French Hen comes to mind, as well as some other things. And one thing that you will find in the Summit University neighborhood is as you get closer to 94, I would say, and probably closer to University, there's a higher density of multifamily homes like duplex, fourplex, etc. There are duplexes, closer to Summit Avenue, but much fewer of them. I was actually looking to find a duplex and was really open to the Summit University and Summit Hill areas. And yeah, it's kind of crazy how there's not that many of them there. But then closer to the highway, it gets a little bit more dense as far as those multifamily opportunities goes. So if you're into the house hacking idea or something like that, you might find one over here. You might even find a very cool historic, 3-story house. But typically it's going to be closer to I-94, or it's going to be closer to Summit, and it's going to be really expensive. So that tends to be how those houses seem to trend right there. So then to the northwest, we're going to Hamline-Midway. Hamline-Midway is again another one of those areas that along University, busy, a lot going on there. It's literally home to one of the busiest intersections, in my opinion, in all of St. Paul, which is Snelling and University, right here. Just outside of which, by the way, is the Allianz Field, which is where the Minnesota United play. So here is this intersection for your reference. It's wide. It's set up for so much traffic to go through in a way that a lot of streets, a lot of places within the city are not. You can see out here in the distance is Allianz Field, which again is where the Minnesota United soccer team plays. And then the Hamline-Midway neighborhood is on the north side of University here. But yeah, you can see here, 2-lane road, 2-lane street with the light rail running down the middle. And yeah, it's a busy place. Midway Books is a very cool bookstore. But so the southern border of University is very much like probably the busiest part of the Hamline-Midway neighborhood. And then they call it Hamline-Midway because, for one, Hamline University is in here, which is another really, really pretty university. And then they call it Midway because it is basically directly midway, right in the middle of downtown Minneapolis and downtown St. Paul. And now the light rail connects the two. It's probably pretty close to the center stop, right, in the overall light rail route there. So southern border is University. Western border is kind of Cleveland, or where Cleveland just ends, right? More or less, I would think of it as the railroad tracks. The northern border is more railroad tracks. I would think of it as Pierce-Butler route as sort of being that northern border. And then the eastern border is Lexington Parkway. There is actually Can Wonderland is actually a pretty wild place. Give it a googs, it's crazy. To the north of there, directly north, is a little bit of St. Anthony Park, this Langford Park area, and then the State Fairgrounds, which again is Falcon Heights, and then northeast-ish is the Como Park neighborhood. Como Park is a pretty large neighborhood, and it's very much named after the park that is in the center of it, and also the lake. This is Lake Como, not to be confused with the one in Italy, but it's very different. But it's a really pretty lake, and the park space is massive. It's home to the Como Park Zoo and home to the Como Park Conservatory. Not much of a zoo goer, and I wouldn't say it's the best zoo in Minnesota. Minnesota Zoo in Apple Valley, in my opinion, better zoo. But the conservatory is sick, is a very, very cool building, and is worth going to in any season. In the winter in particular, if you're kind of looking for, humid air and like, plant air. It's really cool. It's pretty unique place. I think that it's probably the only place like it in Minnesota, to my knowledge, and it's just beautiful all year round. The outdoor is beautiful in the summer, or from spring to fall, and the inside is really beautiful all year round. So worth going to. People do engagement photos. I've actually shot some friends' engagement photos there once upon a time. And then it's also home to the Como Park golf course as well. So you have basically the whole core of the Como Park neighborhood is that park, and there's not a whole lot else going on there. It's not the most walkable neighborhood in terms of access to things within the neighborhood proper. There's a few places and just like a couple commercial spots. But if you are interested in more of like the suburban aspect of things, just to the north of Larpenteur is Roseville, a suburb. But there's quite a few things there. Quite a few places, there's a Cub Foods, a grocery store, there's an Aldi, among other things, just to the north of that. And so just to the east of Como Park is what is known as North End. Again, contains multiple, sub-neighborhoods within it. And the northern boundary here is Larpenteur still, so same as Como. The western boundary is Dale, so it shares a boundary with Como as well. The southern boundary is a railroad track, and I've always kind of thought of it as like mini Ha-Ha or something, but that only takes a part of it. So nonetheless, it's this railroad track right here. And then the eastern boundary is 35E. One pretty good landmark in the north end is the Oakland Cemetery. It takes up quite a huge area right here at the sort of southeastern edge of the neighborhood. And there are a few parks in there, nothing quite as remarkable as Como Park, but your access to Como Park is still quite good. I'll back out here real quick. And in the same way that I said, if you cross under 35E right here from Macalester-Groveland into West 7th, lifestyle access to things doesn't really change that much, but it does become quite a bit more affordable. I would say there's a really similar thing that happens with the Como Park neighborhood and North End. If you cross over Dale, things become just a bit more affordable. There are still more affordable neighborhoods in St. Paul proper and Minneapolis for that matter. But from Como to North End, there is just some level of a discount, right? 10, 20% or something like that. You'll see those prices sort of gradient a little bit. I think North End, in similar to Como Park, I think a lot like how Como doesn't have really that much going on. That's generally true of North End, with the exception of Rice Street. I would say is probably the biggest commercial, core or strip or whatever you will. And all along Rice Street, there's just quite a bit of commercial spaces being used as a huge variety of things. And we'll just kind of travel down here just to give you a sense of what's going on Rice, which is also known as County Road 49, although nobody calls it that. I'm pretty sure you will not hear anybody say, yeah, I'm at County Road 49. So here's kind of a commercial core at Maryland and Rice. And then keep going. You got commercial across from some residential, some more commercial. Okay, this is all 2024. Sometimes these things are so out of date. But yeah, little hardware store, little car parts store, etc., etc. Okay, cool. So we're backing out of North End, and we will pop just to the south of there, which is the Thomas Dale neighborhood. The northern border is that railroad track that basically splits Thomas Dale from Como and Thomas Dale from North End. And not a huge neighborhood. It's pretty big east to west, but not very large north to south. And there is a decent bit of things going on here, right? For one, it runs along University. There's a ton of things happening on University, and you got Lexington and University right here. So we will, nope, that's the wrong way. Apologies. We'll head east along University to kind of give you a sense of things. So again, light rail runs all the way along University here, or at least most of the way along in the Thomasdale neighborhood. A bit more like office park and industrial at times along this part, but that's can be true of University just about the whole way. You got a U-Haul, right? That's not the most exciting thing to have, but a lot of apartments and things like that here as well. Several light rail stops along University in the Thomasdale neighborhood as well as Sun Foods grocery store, an Asian grocery store, and actually Thomasdale is known more colloquially as Frogtown. And Frogtown actually does take up the same exact space. I always thought that it didn't, but it takes up literally the same exact border. It's just another name for the Thomasdale neighborhood. And you will hear people say Frogtown way more than people will say Thomasdale. In fact, I think if you said Thomasdale, a lot of people would say, huh? What neighborhood? Yeah. So, okay. And as you move from west to east along University Avenue, you're getting really close to downtown, right? It doesn't quite go all the way into downtown, but it goes very close. And just to the south of that university border is the Minnesota State Capitol. So access to the likes of downtown is really, really quite good here. And obviously you could take 94 as well if you wanted to, the light rail, etc. Then we're popping over just to this sort of southeast here into downtown St. Paul. Downtown St. Paul is home to a lot of museums and events, event centers and things like that. There's the XL Energy Center, the River Center, the Ordway for Performing Arts, the Landmark Center, Palace Theater, Fitzgerald Theater, and the list goes on. There's just a lot in the way of like museums and theaters and entertainment that happens in what is a pretty small downtown area. Downtown St. Paul is older by a few decades than downtown Minneapolis. There's some really beautiful architecture down here, and it feels older, right? It just feels more akin to maybe like a Chicago or something like that. And no, this building isn't actually that warbly. That's just how the camera made it look. There's a little bit more of a classic feel here. I think if you were like trying to shoot a movie that was based in New York or something, you would probably shoot it in downtown St. Paul rather than downtown Minneapolis. Downtown Minneapolis is like a bit shinier, right? It's a bit newer than downtown St. Paul. Another great little area is over here by the Landmark Center, which is a really beautiful, pretty iconic building right here. Beautiful place. A lot of like brick paved streets and things like that. You have the Landmark Plaza right here, St. Paul Hotel over here, which is pretty epic and pretty beloved. Right here is the James J. Hill Center and a public library as well. I actually shot a wedding there as well, randomly. It's beautiful, really, really pretty inside. And then, yeah, you have some great theaters and things right here. Just a very beautiful area down there. Then in the southeast corner of downtown is what's known as Lower Town. We've done a video on Lower Town in general, really pretty. It's actually home to the European Christmas market, which is very cute. I went there pretty recently with my fiance and actually some past clients of ours. It was very fun. I would say go at night if you can, because then it's lit up and it's very, very charming. Maybe go at dusk. So it's not too freezing cold, but very, very cool little thing they're doing there with all sorts of vendors. Union Depot is a train station, which is where the Empire Builder, I believe, goes through. Don't quote me on that. I think that's true. Mears Park, pretty classic little city park here. And there's a couple restaurants, the Bulldog, Barrio, things like that right there. They'll do events and things like that in Mears Park. And yeah, some cool old buildings, a lot of condos and things like that down here. Back in the day, my band used to rehearse in Lower Town before it was what it is now. It was much, less livable place when we rehearsed there. There's a shout out Station 4, a venue that stopped putting on shows because it was, I think, too gnarly. I'm not kidding. I think that's literally why. And then over here you have the St. Paul Farmers Market, and really cool. I think Saturday and Sunday this happens, and it's just really, really great, really cool vendor, multi-vendor obviously thing here. And then lastly, CHS Field. is a good time. This is where the St. Paul Saints play, a minor league baseball team, partially owned by Bill Murray. So it's got to be fun. Then we're going from downtown to the northeast of downtown to a neighborhood called Payne-Phalen. This is a pretty large neighborhood, and it goes all the way to the northern edge of St. Paul. So basically from downtown all the way to the northern edge of St. Paul. So it takes up a pretty large area. The western border is 35E. The northern border is Larpenteur. The eastern border is English Street, more or less. And then the southern border gets pretty wonky. It kind of follows Phalen Boulevard and then it goes all the way into downtown. Because Payne-Phalen has such a large area, the lifestyle varies pretty dramatically. Again, you could be directly next to downtown in Payne-Phalen, or you could be on this northeastern, little tiny piece that's just on the other side of a lake that is going to feel completely different from everything else. There are quite a few really great restaurants and places to go, right? Naturally, because Payne-Phalen is so large, there's quite a few destinations within the area, right? And it gets pretty busy on some of those commercial core streets. If I were to zoom in here just a little bit and hit the restaurants button, you'll see that a lot of things come up, right? Especially along Payne Avenue, right here between Maryland and Phalen, but then also here along Arcade, again, mostly between Maryland and Phalen. Just a huge selection of these places. A few places that come to mind that are highly regarded are Tongue in Cheek, and then Juche. I don't know that I've ever said that out loud until right now, but Juche. Again, it's a Korean place, very, very beloved. You got Chance's Tavern, Eastside Pizza. But let me just drop the little guy in here and we will just kind of drive down Payne Avenue here a little bit. And I do think that Payne-Phalen is among the most affordable neighborhoods that we have talked about so far. I know North End was when I first started talking about that. The Thomasdale, aka Frogtown neighborhood, is also on the very, very affordable end of St. Paul. We just passed Tongue in Cheek there. And Payne-Phalen also has some very, very affordable homes. Again, it's a huge area, so you can't really blanket statement too much of anything in Payne-Phalen because it changes so dramatically across the neighborhood, right? So again, this is a busy street, Payne Avenue that we're going down. Yeah, I've been to that Ace Hardware quite a few times actually. And I'll put the guy right here on Arcade Street. Hopefully it puts me actually on the street. Yep, okay. And then we'll start heading north here. One thing of note is a place called Vertical Endeavors, which is like a rock climbing gym. Right here you have Sun World Supermarket, which is a huge Asian supermarket, like we said earlier. And a little bit of a vertical slope heading up a hill on Arcade. And here's just kind of a peek at some of the commercial spaces going on here. And then again, like most of Minneapolis and St. Paul, it doesn't take long once if I were to take a right, let's say, off of Arcade here, it would not take long before I was in just kind of a residential street. So here's Jessamine, and yeah, that looks a lot different, right? It's duplexes, single family homes, considerably less dense with less traffic going on here. So you can kind of see in here, there's not much in the way of park space, but it does in the northeast corner have access to a really, really nice park, which is basically Lake Phalen. And yeah, there's a lot going on here. That's nice. It dropped me right in the middle of a golf course. I didn't know that could happen. So let me let me back up. Let's go to Phalen Drive right here, if it'll give it to me. Cool. So Phalen Drive is basically along the lake, and in this park space, and it's a huge park space, but it is somewhat removed from the center of the neighborhood, right? So keep that in mind. While it's decently available, it's still fairly removed from certain parts of Phalen. Dropped us on the East Shore Drive here. just so you can kind of take a look at the lake. Again, it's a great lake. Well, it's not literally a great lake. It's a nice lake. There's a beach just across the way there. And all of the activities that one might do on a lake anywhere in the Twin Cities, really this lake has. It's, again, a really large park space. And this Phalen Regional Park actually basically connects with Keller Park, which is technically in Maplewood. So now we're heading south to Dayton's Bluff. Dayton's Bluff is, again, small, and I've helped a few people end up here. And in fact, some people who really had their sights set on Dayton Bluff. I've actually helped some folks end up in Dayton's Bluff. I'm hoping to have them on the podcast relatively soon. I helped them like 3 years ago or something like that when we weren't doing a podcast. But they really loved what Dayton's Bluff had to offer. And a lot of that has to do with the budget, right? The budget that they were working with at the time. Dayton's Bluff is in the relatively affordable range, I would say on the more affordable end of what St. Paul has to offer, while still having some really charming old houses. A lot of St. Paul has very old houses, but some of the older, pre-1900 homes exist in Dayton's Bluff, where you can still get a good bit of that charm in what is, I would say a bit more affordable price range. Very strange outline going on here. Northern boundary, more or less Phalen Boulevard. Western boundary, Payne Avenue, kind of, and then a little bit of a weird little jut out here. Southern boundary, some Mississippi River, some Great River Road, and then eastern boundary is probably the wackiest of all of them, so I'm not really going to try there. Of note, you have Johnson Parkway, which kind of goes through a lot of the eastern part of the city, of the neighborhood, and it does eventually meet up with I-94, so pretty slick there. With you see the walking path, biking path, sort of in the middle or along the side of the parkway there as well. And I'll do the old restaurant thing, and you'll see that there's not that many restaurants, right? It's largely a residential area here in the Dayton's Bluff area, other than kind of up here, which is actually kind of a continuation of the West 7th and Fort Road. There's a bit going on up there, but then a lot of the restaurants would be just north in Payne-Phalen. And I think some of that ends up making Dayton's Bluff a bit quieter, right? There's probably less through traffic because there's fewer destinations. There are some really nice sort of natural areas. In particular, Indian Mounds Regional Park is really pretty. There's a certain view where you can see both downtown and Minneapolis. This is an example of the picture where a lot of people take pictures from here because you can see downtown St. Paul, and then in the background here is downtown Minneapolis, because like the name implies, Dayton's Bluff is up on a bluff with a bit of a higher elevation than some of St. Paul. Same with Highland Park, also high up, as the name implies. Okay, then we're moving over to Sunray, Battle Creek, Highwood, which I'm just going to call Battle Creek because that's what I've called it my whole life. But it does take up, again, a pretty massive area. And I would say that there are aspects of Battle Creek that start to feel really suburban. I think I said Highland Park is probably the most suburban feeling place. That still, I think, is true. But there's a few places over in the Battle Creek, kind of over by the Battle Creek Regional Park. Let's try this, where, this actually just feels like a suburb to me. It does not feel like anything in the city at all. In fact, these houses are built, probably in the 60s and 70s, which is very, very unlike most of St. Paul or Minneapolis. It's like a decade or so newer than just about everything else. So Battle Creek really is named after Battle Creek Regional Park, or at least that's what it's known for, which is a really, really pretty park space. You also have Battle Creek West. Really great for people who like hiking and biking and just trails in general. When I think of Battle Creek, I almost only think about trails. I don't know why, but that is very much what that park space is known for, and there is a lot of that. Hey, maybe it's actually going to give me, hey, I found it, Battle Creek, Conway, Eastview, Highwood Hills. If you search that in Google, that will give you the actual proper boundary of the neighborhood. And you'll see it's large, but so much of it is this green space, which is pretty marshy. To be honest, there's not really all that much, usable space in here. Obviously, Pig's Eye Lake is huge. This western edge along the Mississippi River, kind of across from Pig's Eye Lake, is this big industrial area. I don't think it's very aesthetically pleasing. You also have a rail yard, a massive rail yard in here. And the rail continues along the river here. But the bright side is that just on the other side of Highway 10, there's a huge buffer of natural space, of green space and things like that, park spaces. I'm going to go back to the regular the regular view here. And then, yeah, the amount of houses, you have the Eastview Conway neighborhood kind of over here, which is probably going to be more akin to Dayton's Bluff or Greater East Side. And then you have kind of those interesting, very suburban neighborhoods, kind of mixed among the Battle Creek neighborhoods, and a lot of topographical change happening there as well. So then we're going to go north. I know we still haven't talked much about West Side. We will, because then you have Greater East Side, which I would say also this is probably among the more suburban areas in all of St. Paul. And this is still a bit older than some of those Battle Creek areas, where the houses are generally going to be built more in like the 50s, kind of even on an edge kind of like this. You're going to get a little bit more of the post-war era, story and a half, and ramblers mixed in there. But it is a bit just more suburban looking than a lot of the other areas that we were talking about, especially because St. Paul is so old. This now feels more like what you would probably expect out of a lot of the neighborhoods, maybe more akin to like a Hamline-Midway or a Como or something like that. But then you do find a good bit of streets where they're just a bit newer, again, by a decade. In a decade, houses changed a lot in a decade back then. So that said, Greater East Side, there's a lot of convenience and a lot of houses that show up, and it does tend to be a bit more on the affordable side of things, but it's a little bit boring, in my opinion. You have White Bear Avenue has some things, but because it's so suburban and kind of right on that edge, it's almost Maplewood, it's almost Oakdale, right? Because of that, it starts to get maybe a little bit less exciting. It's just a bit more suburban, a little bit more, I don't know, corporate, right? So obviously there are some independent restaurants and things like that, but it tends to be like when you think of early days of suburbs of just grids and story and a half houses, that Little Boxes song or whatever that song is, that kind of thing starts to take hold, and you have little suburban kind of looking commercial cores, right? Much more in the strip mall vein and less in the, charming, brownstone style architecture of things. But these are very useful and helpful places to have in a neighborhood. It's just is not that exciting, right? If that sort of city identity is something that you value, Greater East Side might not have that quite as much. But if kind of chill lifestyle, kind of a, neighborhoody neighborhood, even borderlining suburban vibe is what you're after, then yeah, Greater East Side might really do the trick, because it does have a lot of that. I'll drop one more little pin here, kind of over by Beaver Lake to give you a sense of things, right? That's very much post-war and early 50s, a lot of this stuff going on, where it just feels considerably more suburban than a lot of the other places that we've been looking. So last on the list is this West Side neighborhood. And then I still have a lot more things to talk about. So thanks for bearing with me. And I really hope that this video is helpful. While I'm here, while I'm thinking of it, just want to say shout out to the team for just holding it down and letting me be able to do things like this. I truly have the hardest working team in real estate. So thanks to them. Again, I said this area is tiny. It's tiny. It's almost funny to me that it's even part of St. Paul, because there's just not that many houses here. And probably half of it is taken up by this little downtown St. Paul airport, which, for the record, some people are thinking that this would be a busy airport. It's not. It's little guys, right? Little little tiny planes, little prop planes on the, mostly, with maybe some like private jets and things like that. I'm sure there's an aviation person out there who would be like, well, DHL uses it. Okay, that might be true, right? Like there might be some bigger, planes landing there, but just from personal experience, it's not nearly as disruptive as the MSP airport, right? If your house was right by MSP, it's loud, especially if it's under the track. But in this case, I have not found it to be particularly disruptive. There might be a few places where, you might get kind of like berated by little tiny prop planes. So if that drove you nuts, then okay, steer clear. But it's a very, very different experience. So real quick in West Side St. Paul, first of all, Wabasha Street Caves, kind of a cool historic thing, worth like looking into if you're into it. Back in the Prohibition days, they built caves and they did illegal things in them. So it's kind of a cool place to check out. But okay, back here. So Baker Annapolis, that's kind of like a more neighborhood, right? That's where most of these houses are. And then you have like the Riverview neighborhood. And then you have like the Concord Robert, which is in this green area, but there are some houses in there as well. You've got Highway 52, and you have County Road 3, which interestingly enough goes like all the way down toward like Farmington and stuff. You could take it all the way to Northfield and ultimately all the way to Faribault. I think almost nobody does actually take that road that far. But yeah, it's an interesting route to get from St. Paul all the way to Faribault. I've never taken that whole route, so I don't actually know what that would be like. But I could see it being handy if you were, let's say you lived in Farmington and you wanted to get to St. Paul and not have to be on too much of a highway. I could see it being cool. So anyway, getting back to the West Side thing, if I were to click on the restaurant button, there's a decent bit of like restaurants and coffee shops and things like that, especially along Cesar Chavez or Cesar Chavez, pick your poison. But there's not a ton going on. And again, I would say this neighborhood tends to lean on the slightly more affordable side. And because it's so removed from the rest of St. Paul, I would say there's a little bit of like a stillness to certain areas, right? Because there's just, you really can only take a couple bridges into St. Paul proper, and you very quickly enter the suburbs of the likes of West St. Paul. Okay, so that was like kind of a quick, not really that quick overview of all these different neighborhoods, huge variety of things going on there, right? But real quick, I wanna kind of pop into, just so you're not confused, if you were to look up like the ward boundaries, these are more related to like political wards, right? Like congressional wards or whatever. So you're gonna see that there are 7 wards here. That's very, very different than what the actual neighborhoods are, which is this, right? So if you were on the City of St. Paul website, you might come across this. That's more about politics than anything else. And then a lot of the people that we're helping, they're thinking about schools, right? And they want to make sure that they're ending up in a school that is right for them. St. Paul School District is interesting. It behaves differently than other places sometimes, right? So for one, if you have an address, you are going to have what's called a community school assigned to that address, which means that you have a much higher priority of your student getting into that school. And I would implore you to look into this for yourself. But I believe if you're at a certain address, there are 3 schools, elementary, middle, and high, that are considered a community school for that address. And if you're at that address, you are pretty much guaranteed a spot in that school. That said, there are other schools, and there's a lot of sort of like movement among different schools that can happen within St. Paul. There's a city website called St. Paul Public Schools that I would recommend you take a look at. So in frequently asked questions in particular, I don't know why they've made it this confusing, but there's a school zones and area tab that you can click on. There's also a school finder tool. Pretty much every school district has a school finder tool where you can put in an address and it will tell you what your schools are. I just typed in an address in the Highland Park neighborhood, and for example, it shows you your community school is the Horace Mann School. okay, and that's grades K through 5. Your area community schools are different. And you can see that there are other schools that will serve F, for example, but there are other schools that will serve every, area within St. Paul. And so there's actually quite a few of those. And there's actually quite a few of these district magnet schools going on there. And actually, while I'm thinking of it, there's actually a charter school district in St. Paul called Nova Classical Academy. It's a really highly regarded, and typically in the likes of Anish.com, it ranks in the top 10 school districts in the state. And it's very small, and I believe it's K through 12. And yeah, it really ranks very, very highly for how small it is. A lot of the other, smaller magnet schools maybe don't rank that high because they're not quite as maybe well-rounded or something like that. Maybe they specialize in one thing but don't do another thing. But that's kind of the beauty of a charter or magnet school, right? Is if your student, let's say, is really into art and not at all into sports, then does it matter how good the sports program is at the school? Maybe not. So you can use that school finder tool to find what community school you would sort of be designated to. But then there's something like a lottery program. If you wanted to get into one of these other district magnet schools or just a different community school, right? Then you can try to open enroll or like intra open enroll into another school within the St. Paul district, whether it's magnet, charter, or otherwise. And there's a decent chance, or there's a chance you get in. I think you pick your top 3 and there's like a little bit of a lottery for those kind of things. So if I go into niche.com, this is going to be a pretty good look at the school rankings, right? And how different schools fare across St. Paul. I'm not sure if it's completely exhaustive, but there's obviously quite a few schools going on here. So that's a decent bit of schools. You will see kind of the trend of there's a higher hit rate of A-, or I guess there's the green dots, if you will, A- to A schools in this southern triangle of St. Paul. And then there's the one kind of here as well. And then, but there's also still quite a few C's, C+, and things like that kind of moving around here. And then as you get to these other areas, you're going to see pretty consistent C, B-, B+ up here in the St. Anthony Park. So elementary school, B+ up there, B- at Johnson Senior High School in the Payne-Phalen area, B+ at the French Immersion School. I'm not even going to try to say that word. And then a B- at Harding Senior High School in Dayton's Bluff, as well as Como Park Senior High School, B-, and Chelsea Heights Elementary School, B-. So these are like a pretty good look at, how things maybe trend, but you'll also kind of see that there's not necessarily too much of a trend other than A- tends to be in this lower triangle. But keep in mind, the lottery system really takes a lot of this and kind of like turns it on its head. So you could end up in any one of these neighborhoods if you were really pining for, B+ or A- school or something like that. There's a decent chance that you could make that happen. A better than zero chance anyway. And then of course the thing that doesn't even come up in the St. Paul Public School District is Nova Classical Academy, which is the #1 school district in Ramsey County. And then of course the thing that doesn't even show up when you search St. Paul Public School Districts is Nova Classical Academy, which is the #1 ranked school district in Ramsey County. And again, it is small. It literally is only on this one piece of land, K through 12. Overall, it gets an A on niche, gets an A+ for academics, C- for clubs and activities, which does speak to a little bit of what's going on there. A+ for college prep, right? So but it's also ranked 7th best school district in all of Minnesota out of 383. And again, very small, and it's not a private school either. It's a, public charter school. And then the final thought on schools is I just want to show you this map. This is a 2024-2025 district map. I'm sure these lines change, right? So if you move here in 2 years, these might be slightly different, just so you know. But this is how the zones or the districts within the districts, or whatever you want to call it, I'm sure they have a real word for it. This is how they break up. You have A, B, C, D, E, F, and for some reason, F2 and not G. I don't understand why, but that's how they did it. So if it's helpful to you, you can just cross-check this, which is under the St. Paul Public School District website. They have this map, and cross-check that with niche, and you can kind of wrap your head around, you know, where maybe a school is that you want your student to go to. And then of course you can use that school finder tool to get very, very specific with it for your addresses. Real quick, I just want to talk about like entertainment on the whole in St. Paul. St. Paul is generally known as kind of a sleepier, less exciting city to Minneapolis. And I think it's probably pretty true. There's just a little bit less going on here. For example, in Minneapolis, the Minnesota Twins baseball team, the Minnesota Vikings football team, and the Minnesota Timberwolves all play in the downtown area. In downtown St. Paul, there's really only the Minnesota Wild hockey team play. And then not in downtown, randomly along I-94, by that busy intersection I mentioned, Snelling and University, is Allianz Field, where the Minnesota United soccer team plays. So there is some of that going on there, albeit less than what happens in downtown Minneapolis. When I think of some of the best density of restaurants and things like that in St. Paul, obviously downtown St. Paul has some pretty cool classic old staples, and there's kind of potential for a level of like elevated offerings, right? Although along West 7th here, I also think of those as being some pretty classic, like long-standing restaurants and bars and, you know, supper clubs and things like that along West 7th. I also would say along Grand Avenue, especially from Dale to Lexington, is going to be one of the more like premier commercial spaces in the Twin Cities, and certainly in St. Paul, with just a lot going on there. And again, some great restaurants. Kind of smaller, but really good, would be along Selby and Dale to Selby and Western. Some really, really good stuff there as well. And then frankly, it becomes a bit more scattered throughout Merriam Park, Macalester-Groveland, things like that. You know, a couple good spots in St. Anthony Park, and then some really highly regarded cuisine in the likes of Frogtown, a little bit in North End. Payne-Phalen starts to get a little bit more of that action, and then just about everything else starts to be a bit more just spread out around the city. Pretty early on in helping people relocate here, I realized that I had to be just careful about comparing Minnesota to Minnesota. Right, and so comparing Minneapolis to St. Paul, it's not always a fair comparison. If I'm saying that St. Paul has fewer lakes, right, than Minneapolis, okay, sure, but it probably has more lakes than where most people are coming from, right? A lot of the people that we help are not coming from somewhere nearly as full of water as Minnesota, and while St. Paul has fewer large lakes, right, if you look at Minneapolis, there's quite a few large lakes that take up substantial area in the city. St. Paul has less of that, right? You have Como Lake and Phalen are the two largest like lakes that people would visit, you know, that people would walk around and things like that. But they're considerably smaller than that of Minneapolis. But you also have the Mississippi River running almost all of the southern border of St. Paul. I think maybe literally all of the southern border of St. Paul. And the river, while maybe you're not going swimming there or canoeing or kayaking quite as likely, because it is the Mississippi River, you still have a really beautiful like bluff element and natural element, really great for trails and walking and biking and things like that. You could spend a lot of time doing that, which actually then makes me think about, here's a bike map. So if you zoom in a little bit here into St. Paul, you'll see that any of the solid green, which really pay attention along the river, there's solid green for days, right? You could go on a very long bike ride along this river and probably see, actually you'd see some pretty dramatic elevation changes down here at the southern end. I've done that for video, actually. and all along the river, tons and tons of the off-road separated bicycle lane, which really just means that it's probably like the best biking, right? But you can see that if you want to, you can almost circle all of St. Paul on an off-road separated bicycle lane. There may be a few places where you would have to connect on an on-road bicycle boulevard or an on-road bicycle lane, but just about all of it you could get around. I will say, I said Greater East Side gets a little bit more suburban and a little bit less exciting. You'll see that too here in the bike lanes a little bit, right? There's a little bit less connectivity among it, and it gets a little bit more spread out. And then down here also, there's just fewer things going on down at the very, very bottom of the Battle Creek area, although some pretty cool, topography and stuff happening in here. So just about everything else is going to be like along Summit Avenue. Great place to ride a bike. Generally, you feel quite protected, quite disconnected from traffic along those things. And you will see, I think, that along Snelling Avenue, there are no bike lanes because Snelling is pretty busy. So that wouldn't be the most fun place to ride a bike. So quickly, I want to talk a little bit more about downtown. Like Minneapolis, downtown, in the effort to be walkable in a cold climate, they created skyway systems. I believe it's a bit less robust than the skyway system in Minneapolis, but it still does get you pretty far, to be honest. I'm not really a skyway user because I've never had a job in a skyway building or anything like that. But by default, you do kind of end up using them going from parking ramps to the XL Energy Center or something like that, right? You don't necessarily realize I'm in a skyway, but you are. So you can see here, this is a skyway map. This is from the city of St. Paul. And they give you this skyway map. And anything red is like a tunnel. So that would be like an underground little bit. Anything that's like this mustardy color, it would be more of like a proper skyway. But you could see that if you had to, you could get all the way from the XL Energy Center or the River Center parking ramp and probably just about the Science Museum of Minnesota, all the way over to, I don't know, River Park Lofts. You can get really far into Lower Town in that skyway system, but then it does fall off kind of on the edges. Certainly that north section, there's almost none. And then this tunnel over here is more related to the hospitals. So you have St. Joseph's Hospital, and then it does connect with what used to be McNally Smith College of Music and is no longer that college. And then there's one really, I think, important thing for y'all to wrap your head around. If you're not from here, if you haven't been here, if you haven't spent a good bit of time here, is just how easy it is to get from Minneapolis to St. Paul. Okay, I think a lot of people are like, well, Minneapolis sounds more exciting. Sounds like it's more fun. It's like, okay, sure. But it's really easy to get from St. Paul to Minneapolis. I think people are used to, from one city to the city over being like a 45-minute drive. It's not. From downtown St. Paul to downtown Minneapolis, it's probably a 15-minute drive, maybe 20, 25 with some pretty bad traffic. And you're along I-94, which is not the funnest of highways in Minnesota, but it's quick. Generally, it moves quick for most of the time. So that said, there are some places where you're only a bridge between, right? So Highland Park, you can take the Ford Parkway Bridge or the 46th Street Bridge. Merriam Park, you can take the Marshall Avenue Bridge or the Lake Street Bridge, and it gets you right to the other side, right into Minneapolis proper. Whereas in St. Anthony Park, you could literally take one step, on a street, and you would be from Minneapolis to St. Paul. So the connectivity is pretty wild. Let's say Greater East Side to literally to our shop right now, which is where our office is, just across the river from downtown. That's a 22-minute drive because you can hop on 36th. If you were to go further down, it gives you another route. You're taking 94 instead of 36th. If you were in West Side St. Paul, 25 minutes from kind of that further edge to downtown Minneapolis. If you're in Highland Park, 21 minutes, and there's probably 4 routes that are within 2 minutes of each other to get there. Okay, so that trend exists within Minneapolis and St. Paul, even in traffic. As we're shooting this, it's 7 p.m. on a Thursday night, so just past probably what would be considered a rush hour. There's nowhere in St. Paul that is more than 30 minutes to downtown Minneapolis. And it's probably pretty true that there's just about nowhere in St. Paul that's 30 minutes from almost anywhere in Minneapolis, whether that's, you know, North Minneapolis to West Side St. Paul. You're probably looking at about a half an hour max on any of those, especially without some traffic. And one thing that we really pride ourselves in is if you had a relatively open idea of what you wanted out of a neighborhood, or let's say a very specific idea of the lifestyle that you wanted and the characteristics that you wanted of a neighborhood, and you also have a good idea of what kind of house you want, we can really narrow that down for you. That's something that we've really honed in on as a team is trying to pull as much out of you as we possibly can when it comes to what you're looking for in a lifestyle when you move to the Twin Cities. Because I say this a lot, but you can only design your lifestyle once. You only get to relocate to the Twin Cities once. Well, I mean, maybe you could multiple times, but you really only get to do this one time. And if your goal is to put in roots, then let's make sure that it's as close to the right spot as we possibly can from the jump. We'll save you a bunch of money, save you a bunch of time. If you're interested, hit us up and we'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.